got the recorded or the guided notes today. I sent them out a little late. I apologize. So, all right, so this would be the last slide from yesterday. So you don't need to write this down on the notes I gave you today because it's not on there. That was on the last slide yesterday. So yesterday we were talking, and again, it's mainly me, but I want to include you in the experience. We were talking about the concept of human evolution and the kind of scientific search for human origins here. And so we were talking about the whole concept of kind of hominids and bipedalism and that, and talking about how those who subscribe to the theory, the paleoanthropologists and that, like to break down our kind of like our origins into particular categories, right? However, our textbook is already outdated in that matter. So according to your text, the oldest of the hominids, the oldest of our kind of human ancestors would be classified as Australopithecine. All right. Some of the discoveries include the Tongue Child by Raymond Dart in 1924, which is considered by many to be the first major discovery. But Dart wasn't fully kind of embraced by the paleoanthropology world probably until the 50s, and then in 1974 with the discovery of Lucy by Donald Johanson. That really solidified not only the kind of the factor of bipedalism, but also the concept that our ancestors originated in Africa, the whole Africa theory. That was even added even 4 years later with the discovery of those footprints in Tanzania. However, already there has been, a kind of pushes the story back about another 1 million years, a discovery that was discovered in 94, but not officially kind of considered the oldest, most complete hominid until 2010. And that's the discovery of Ardi, which was also in Ethiopia, same place where Lucy was discovered, that kind of starts the classification of Ardipithecus. So when they redo this textbook, so a few years from now, they're going to have to include that into the text. All right. But again, both Australopithecine and Ardipithecus are very primate-like. There's evidence that while they were bipedal, they did kind of live in trees. Talked about bipedalism as a means of kind of, and again, the whole concept of evolution. You evolve, species evolve, they change for survival, basically. And so Australopithecine, in some sense, to most paleoanthropologists believe, kind of evolved into a classification referred to as Homo habilis, which means skillful man, in the sense that this separates Australopithecine and Ardipithecus is the evidence of stone tools, which were basically rocks, right? They're basically flint stones, if you will, that were used to crack open bone marrow of game that had been already killed by predators. So our human ancestors were scavengers, essentially. They weren't at the top of the food chain, right? And looking at those rocks that we showed yesterday, they're not that impressive, right? But they gave enough of a change in them to essentially kind of like our kind of Homo habilis, our human ancestor, was able to look at them, shape them, and basically kind of understand, you can crack this open, I can get more sustenance, more protein. All right. The first major Homo habilis discovery was discovered by Mary and Louis Leakey, who I gave you the worksheet, the article yesterday. They are essentially the kind of the first family of paleoanthropology, particularly in the 20th century. They discovered not only bones and fossil remains, but also evidence of stone tools. And like I said yesterday, this here is an image of Louis and Mary Leakey, which maybe your grandparents have a similar picture of Nana and Papa holding a jawbone of a 2 million year old hominid. All right. So we've got our classification, Ardipithecus, Australopithecine, Homo habilis. And then the next classification on the evolutionary tree would be Homo erectus. All right. The name itself means upright man. Now, this is where we kind of get this whole idea where it's kind of walking bipedalism, right? Where some of these discoveries kind of like Dart was basically adding on to the idea that bipedalism is an important factor in our kind of our evolutionary process. First appeared about 1.6 million years ago is generally the kind of contemporary time frame there. based on the skull cap, brain size about 3/4 the size of modern humans. So we do see the brain kind of developing here along the lines of a kind of a larger brain. Now, the one thing that separates Homo erectus from Homo habilis is they're the first ones believed to leave Africa, mainly because they found these remains in other parts of the world, all right, and use fire. All right, that's the key. However, there are some theories that maybe Homo habilis may have used fire. All right, but these are always theories that are being kind of tested and challenged a bit. All right, but for our purposes, Homo erectus is the first one to leave Africa because they found remains in other parts of the world and use fire. All right, so that's the thing that definitely kind of separates Homo erectus from Homo habilis. And still primate looking, but we are getting kind of less and less primate looking, if you will. All right, so this is kind of a skull recreation of Homo habilis. I'm sorry, Homo erectus. All right. Now, the first major Homo erectus discovery was discovered in 1891, kind of early on in kind of paleoanthropology. It's credited to a guy named Eugene Du Bois, who, like I says, there was a Dutch anthropologist. Really, he was kind of an amateur anthropologist. He was actually a medical doctor by trade, but he was kind of fascinated by Darwin. And he used his own money to basically fund a expedition to what is now Indonesia, which at the time was controlled by the Netherlands, the Dutch. And so he spent his own money, took about a kind of a team of about 20 guys with him to kind of dig. According to the stories, by the time the remains of what we refer to as Java Man were discovered, he only had one guy that stayed with him. He was apparently kind of hard to deal with, and even that guy hated his guts. Apparently, the guy would tell how he would just basically sit while they were eating around the fire, and he would basically cuss him out in French. I guess Du Bois did not know French. All right, but what he discovers is, and it's called Java Man because it was discovered on the island of Java. And it was, again, he was kind of taking a risk here because the majority of those in paleoanthropology were looking closer to Europe. All right. And so what he discovers is essentially top of a skull cap, some teeth, some incisors, and a leg bone. All right. And again, the leg bone is important here to kind of the story of bipedalism, if you will. So there's Du Bois, nice mustache. All right. And this is what he discovered. I said, see the skull cap. This is kind of the view there, the teeth, and then the bones, the leg bone. And so this was the thing that he goes back to Europe thinking that he's going to be basically kind of treated as a rock star in the paleoanthropology world, and being in a science is peer reviewed. So he gets questions about, and people question whether these kind of particularly the skull cranium was more of a primate like and such. And he was temperamental, and he basically said, taking my ball and going home. So he wouldn't let anybody else kind of like basically analyze his findings. The government actually sued him to try to have him basically kind of allow kind of like people to analyze it, and Du Bois lost. All right. Today, the remains or the findings that he had are in a museum in Amsterdam, I believe. And so he was vindicated later when there was a discovery in the 1920s of something called Peking Man. And Peking is the kind of anglicized or English way of saying Beijing, that it had a similar kind of skull kind of shape. And there was a leg bone there that was somewhat similar as well. A few more bones, I think, were found with Peking Man. So that kind of fills in the gaps and kind of vindicates Du Bois. All right. Until Dart's discovery, this was essentially considered like the missing link for a long period of time. But the whole story of kind of man kind of being bipedal and kind of standing upright really has its origins with Homo erectus, right? And so this is kind of a recreation of what Peking Man would look like. Said still somewhat primate looking, but we're getting a little bit closer and kind of moving a little bit closer to kind of more human appearance here. All right. Now, these next two classifications are a little confusing. Your textbook has them classified in something that I don't generally, there's a more modern contemporary way to describe them, and it gets a little confusing. So our next classification is Homo sapiens. However, this is not necessarily us. This is not us yet. All right, this is just a step before us. And in reality, how your textbook has this might be a classification in one of those kind of branches of the evolutionary tree that kind of dies out. All right, the name means wise man. All right, and so it first appeared about 500,000 years ago. When the world was kind of changing, we see kind of major changes when it comes to climate and that, based on skulls and that, skull shapes, brain size about a third larger than Homo erectus. All right. However, like I said, this is not quite us, and your textbook has a real kind of weird way to kind of describing this. Probably the most famous of this classification of Homo sapiens would be this group, the Neanderthals. Right, Neanderthals, in many cases, believed to be the first of Homo sapiens. Right, Neanderthals is a name given to these Homo sapiens that inhabited much of Europe and parts of Southwest Asia, like from Turkey to what is now modern day Iraq and to modern day Israel, Jordan, those places. Named after the Neander Valley in Germany, where the early remains were discovered. Now, Neanderthals, as it goes, these are your cavemen, right, essentially, because most of the fossil remains were found in caves. All right. And so Neanderthals, these were the groups they've kind of probably migrated from what was the Middle East into cooler climates into Europe, all right, during a kind of a major ice age. So this is a map of all the kind of the Neanderthal discoveries that they found. All right, heavy concentration in France, right here, and in Germany. All right, few in Spain, a couple in Italy here and there. Yeah, as far east as Iraq. All right. Now, if you notice, like I'll hit you guys with these maps, graphs, and charts whenever I can, and sometimes I like to take it a little step further. I'm a little extra with this. This map's in French, just to church it up for you. All right. And so when we talk about Neanderthals, this is the kind of image we have. Kind of wide noses, thick and stuff. But you notice what Neanderthal is wearing here. And so in that sense, they believe that this is the first of the human species to adapt to cold climates. All right. As a result, we see kind of Neanderthals evolving as far as like bone and muscle structure. All right. They have thicker bones, more well-developed muscles, tend to be a little bit shorter, stockier. This is because they're living primarily in cold climates, but it just as they stay in colder climates, their bodies change a bit. But also they adapt, like you saw what he was wearing there. He's wearing a fur coat, right? So they also adapt. And in many cases, you guys engage in kind of this evolutionary process, every day, like when you get up to get dressed. Like if you're going to go outside today, you're probably not going to rock that chinchilla that you have. Not that you're not a player, because major players do what they want. Haters stand on the sidelines to do what they can, but it's a little warm for that. All right, so you're basically adapting, and this is an evolutionary kind of concept here. Right? And so Neanderthals were the first ones to basically look at an animal and say, not only is that delicious, but it's also warm. All right, and so they're adapting in many ways. And so our kind of contemporary, for a while there, we had this image of Neanderthals as obviously being kind of uncouth, uncivil, you basically kind of like your quintessential cavemen. However, there's a little more findings that find that they were more social. They did have, they formed large groups than we thought they had. Through adapting, that requires some type of kind of like skills in kind of surviving and such. So, like those Geico commercials are kind of what you think of Neanderthals, right? This is an image here of a Neanderthal in a museum in Germany, kind of recreation there, right? So don't need to write this down. This is for my impending Alzheimer's. The problem is that Neanderthal is essentially one of those branches that dies out. They survived about 100,000 years, probably a little bit more. But in the evolutionary kind of story, that's a relatively short period of time. Around 30,000 years ago, they vanished. All right. Now it's still somewhat debatable. Some people, there's a theory because there are some people that actually still have Neanderthal DNA in their genetic makeup. So there's some evidence that Neanderthals may have interbred with modern humans, right? But again, this is all debatable because they didn't leave behind written records, right? I was just watching something the other day called Neanderthal Apocalypse on the History Channel that was kind of addressing like some of the things that may have happened. All right, and they're saying there's a surprising more number of people that have small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, and it may indicate that they may have interbred, but they were at conflict with our modern species, which is us right here, Homo sapiens sapiens. It's a kind of a silly term, in my opinion. It means doubly wise humans. The more contemporary thing is that they're classifying Neanderthals as Homo neanderthalis, which makes more sense, and us as Homo sapiens. But this, for whatever reason, it kind of confuses the story here of evolution. But this is us, Homo sapiens sapiens. So that's what technically we are. But when people say Homo sapiens, we know what we're talking about, all right? Because there's not full Neanderthals that are still kind of walking around. All right. And so this is the kind of the term for our modern species, if you will. All right. And there's evidence that Homo sapiens sapiens and Neanderthals, particularly in Europe, were at odds, that they were competing for the same amount of game, compete for the same amount of territory. All right. Those that kind of came in contact with Neanderthals in Europe were often referred to as Cro-Magnons, all right, which is a kind of a French term here. Mainly because a lot of these kind of early remains were discovered in France and Germany, places like that. All right. Again, you'll see like the kind of thing that this guy is kind of holding. We start to see the kind of development of tools becoming more advanced, particularly when it comes to hunting. All right. So there's this contemporary thought that basically Cro-Magnons were smarter than Neanderthals, that, you know, they hunted in larger groups. Some of that is being challenged now, all right, on the kind of contemporary thought of what happened to Neanderthals. All right. But there is evidence roughly they existed at the same time. Like here, these are two skulls that were discovered roughly in the kind of the same time period here in Germany. The one on the left is the Neanderthal. The one on the right is Cro-Magnon. You definitely see a difference when it comes to kind of bone structure here. Neanderthal is definitely thicker brow, larger nose, kind of like nasal cavities there because of living in the colder climates here. All right. Bone structure, you see a difference. All right. The Neanderthal is the one on the left. They tend to be shorter, thicker bones, again, because living in colder climates. Cro-Magnons kind of migrated into this area, into Europe, in the colder climates, probably from the Middle East. All right. So their body structures don't really kind of like have that kind of drastic change that we see with Neanderthals, who lived in colder climates for a longer period of time. All right. Now, again, like kind of what do we know about Cro-Magnons in the sense of what gave them a little bit more of a kind of advantage maybe over Neanderthals was one, that they had linguistic skills, meaning there's an evidence of a language probably and way to communicate in groups. However, that theory is being tested. There's maybe some evidence that Neanderthals maybe had a kind of a language into themselves. We do believe, though, based on kind of like fossil remains, is that they had a longer lifespan than Neanderthals, in certain cases maybe 10 years on average. So with that, they're outliving Neanderthals, also maybe outbreeding Neanderthals. And like I said, there's some evidence that maybe they kind of interbred. We do know that Cro-Magnons were artistic. They left behind a lot of cave drawings. All right. And so like Picasso saw a number of these caves at like places in France and stuff like that. And kind of his famous quote is that we've invented nothing, meaning that art is kind of inherent in kind of the human experience, kind of inherent in kind of our human DNA to a certain extent. But there's also, again, there's some people who are believing that Neanderthals may have been artistic as well. So this chapter, you know, in maybe 10 years or so, maybe having totally different, you know, like kind of outcomes, all based on the kind of like evidence of like things that are just kind of recently discovered. But these are the things, this is one of the questions all the following accept. All right. So like some of the like kind of famous kind of cave drawings. This here is at Luxor in France, which is the most famous one. There's these kids playing soccer. It was like in middle of World War II, like 1940 something. And the ball went into this cave, and they kind of like went to go get it, and then they noticed that was all in this cave was all these kind of paintings on the wall of animals and game that were in the area. Some of it pretty detailed, all right, like you see evidence, kind of bulls and such. The colors tend to be kind of red and hue, red and black. They probably use like things like charcoal, clay, stuff like that, stuff that's high in iron, for their paintings. Now, why were they doing it? We're not totally sure. They just left behind these paintings just to kind of maybe indicate this is the type of game that was around to hunt. This here, you see a bull. It's definitely kind of like very distinctive. All right. You even see the kind of the eyes there, horns. This is the image of a horse that was found in the cave that may push the story of what we call domestication of horses, which we'll talk about on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending who's coming when, about domestication of animals, but somewhat detailed, for being like 30,000 years old or whatever. And this is a cave here in Spain, which shows you the kind of the outline of a bull. Now, in Spain, if you go to Spain, you'll see billboards of just simply a bull. The bull is kind of one of the symbols of Spain. At Loxaw, particularly, they've made a recreation of the cave because as they had people coming through, they noticed as the kind of tourists would come through, that it would kind of fade the colors on the wall with all the kind of influx of people coming in there. So like this is a cave in Spain where the colors were basically after people were coming to visit and stuff like that, they kind of lost all the pigmentation to the images there. So they in Loxaw and other places, they try to kind of hold that off and stem that by kind of making recreations, if you will. Okay, so that's basically it for section 2 here. You guys have any questions, any concerns? I appreciate you staying awake for it. So I don't know if you guys got the letter or got the email. I don't know how they sent it out, but you guys know that next week we're going back to hybrid. All right. So those of you guys with the last names A through L, you'll be with me Tuesday and Thursday. And those of you guys who have M through Z, Wednesday, Friday. All right. So my plan is to test over this chapter next Friday, not tomorrow, but the next Friday. All right. And it's basically open notes. All right. So from still bring your Chromebooks because I'm going to try to limit the amount of paper that's used. I'll try to still do the Chromebook thing. All right. I'm not going to give you guys an assignment for tomorrow, and then Monday's Labor Day. So just kind of enjoy your weekend as we get back to in classroom instruction. So if you don't have any questions or concerns, you can go about your day and have a good weekend. Shoot me an email if anybody needs anything. Later.